and I'm your host for today's half hour with Brooke Shields, Pretty Baby. This is a terrific, I guess you'd call it a documentary. I think it plays like a feature film, but it was in two parts on Hulu, and you can see it all over the place. And of course, the title tells you everything. It is the story of Brooke Shields. And today we have its director, not just its director, its Emmy nominated director. Yes, congratulations, Lana Wilson. Hi.
Thank you so much. What a thrilling introduction. Thanks,
Well,
Pete. Thanks for
isn't that
having me.
exciting? The last time I talked to you, the Emmy nominations had not come out, and now it's so exciting. You got nominated for your directing and documentary and nonfiction categories there. And how did that feel?
It felt amazing. I mean, I was shocked. It was incredible. I think that I see it as a recognition of the entire creative team, because really directing, it is so much about the collaboration with the key, creative producer. Our producer Christine O'Malley was a huge part of this. The editors, the whole creative team is, I feel, recognized in this category. So I think it meant a lot to everyone who worked on the film, and of course to me. And it was great, really honor.
Very exciting. You are a past Emmy winner for your work, which includes a wide swath of subjects.
Yeah,
You're not like in one zone like entertainment, like this one is about,
yeah,
but After Tiller, The Departure, A Cure for Fear, Plimpton, they're all like all over the map. You don't want to
yeah.
settle in one area. You do what interests you, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think what I really love are kind of these transformational quests for identity and for meaning. And so they're often kind of extreme stories, I would say, people living at the outer limits of something. I think that looking at people with really huge lives or in extreme situations in their everyday life are an amazing way to kind of learn about being human and what it means, and how we are and how we evolve. So yeah, it is a wide range of subject matters, though, for sure.
So how did Brooke Shields come into this? Because Brooke has been offered many opportunities to tell her story in different formats like this, and it never, worked out. It never really like turned her on to want to go through this process. So what was it about what you pitched and this project that made it finally happen for Brooke?
Well, I think um, when I went into this first meeting with Brooke, she had watched all of my films. And she'd actually watched my film, The Departure, which is in Japanese, and it's about death. She'd watched that twice. And so when she told me that, I was like, whoa, like that is serious. So that kind of showed me that she really cared about the approach that a director would take, and she responded to what I'd made. But also I think that um, I wasn't coming in knowing Brooke's story inside out. I mean, I'd read both of her books, and which I loved, and I knew the basic story, but I think that I was coming into that first meeting saying, wouldn't it be amazing to connect this to bigger questions and debates in our culture that are still going on today? And I think I also learned from her, that first meeting, more about the personal struggles she had had trying to figure out who Brooke, was in relationship to this symbol, Brooke Shields, that became a global phenomenon when Brooke was 11 years old. And so she was really on this lifelong quest to understand her identity through all of that. And that's the kind of thing where, when I say, extreme situation, everyone is on a journey to figure out who they are and how they want to live. We all go through that. With Brooke, it was like in this hyperbolic, global stage level. So it was an extreme experience for her. But I think she responded to the idea that this documentary could tell her story, but also this bigger cultural story over the different things Brooke Shields represented at different points in time, and why, and how that held a mirror up to what our society thought about, I would say, women and girls at different points in time.
Yeah, it's very relevant beyond the world of entertainment for particularly girls, younger girls too, to look at this
Mhm.
story and see all the pitfalls that she went through and survived. because
Yeah.
somebody in her position doesn't always survive. And I thought that was so inspiring about this.
Mhm.
Before we go on, let's take a look at the teaser trailer here for the show. Give us a little taste of it here.
Brooke Shields, the most photographed woman in the world.
Iconic American beauty.
A sexualized child model.
Exploitation. Vulnerable. She was catapulted into the world of adult sexuality.
I'm amazed that I survived any of it.
What happened to her isn't really about her, it's just about women.
I was just born with this faith. I wanted to think about the things that could have happened without beauty.
You know, this project's given a lot of gravitas, as I like to put it, because it comes from ABC News, George Stephanopoulos, his company here, and a lot of heavyweights in the news world behind it as well.
Yeah. Well, that was a really cool thing to work with George Stephanopoulos and his wife and production company partner, Ali Wentworth, who were both so smart and creative and wonderful, but also working with an ABC News was a very different experience for me because you actually, rigorous journalistic standards were for the first time being applied to me. But, you know, it's really like everything had to be not only fact checked, but for example, there's a scene in the film where Brooke is in a trial against a photographer named Gary Gross. Brooke is age 16 and Gary Gross took nude photos of Brooke when she was age 9. And at first, ABC News was like, well, we can't use any of this stuff because we didn't have witnesses for the trial. So we actually tracked down a transcript of that trial in the microfiche in an Albany library to be able to use it, you know, and it ended up being great because you see flashes of the transcript in the film. And actually the way that 16-year-old Brooke was being grilled on the stand in that trial, it reminded me of a lot of conversations that happen today around, for example, the conversation that a board investigating a college campus sexual assault, the questions they might have for a survivor, questions like, you know, you like posing in the nude, don't you? You like being sexual, don't you? You're trying to be a Lolita, aren't you? So that's just one little example of how we really had to work to kind of go above and beyond journalistically with this project. I think it does bring like a very clear integrity to the project when you go through that process.
Yeah, and you know, extraordinarily in this show, she talks about something she never talked about before. I mean, it was the first time we've heard her talk about a sexual assault, something that she went through, and her whole thing going through it was fascinating to listen to her relive it. A part, you know, of somebody who has been photographed around the world, interviewed a million times, as this show also points out, but had this still in her head and never revealed it publicly in this way.
Yeah. When Brooke first told me about her experience of the sexual assault, I think what I thought was so powerful and unique about the way Brooke talked about it was really in her capacity to think out loud, so that you're there with her, understanding this very complicated mix of emotions she felt. Sexual assault is not simple for anyone who survives it. There's often self-blame. The most common reaction to sexual assault is not fight or flight, but it's actually to freeze or to fawn, you know? So I think that the way Brooke talked about it, it was just like being inside her thought process in a way that I found incredibly relatable and raw and honest. And I was just like, to get to hear this, you know, you've struggled with feelings of self-blame and complicity and all of that, and are still processing it now. I think that's really great for people to hear and to see. It's a very real, complicated experience. And, you know, that's the kind of thing too, where at the beginning, Brooke and I talked about it early on, and I always felt I didn't want to put it in just because it was news, because no one had heard this before. But I thought it should be in the film only if it made sense thematically and really felt like an important part of the story we're telling in the film, which ultimately it did, because Pretty Baby is looking at Brooke basically finding agency and gaining autonomy over her life and her mind and her identity. And I really saw this experience, the sexual assault, as being the ultimate violation of her autonomy, mentally, physically, and emotionally. So ultimately, it did feel like an important part of Brooke's story. But we always wanted to have it in a way that felt complex and like you could be inside Brooke's processing experience of it.
You know, a major part of the show is the relationship with her mother. It
Mm,
is a mother-daughter story as well
mhm,
as anything that it is, with Terry Shields, who was somewhat controversial in the
mhm,
media and different things about the way she dealt with Brooke's career, what she let her do, different things like that.
mhm,
And also really seemed to want the limelight for herself in many ways
mhm.
too. And it's amazing to see that dynamic play out here.
Brooke and Terry had a really complex relationship. There was a lot of love there, also a lot of pain there. Terry was an alcoholic, so Brooke was, the caretaker of her alcoholic mother, and she felt the pressure to keep her mother alive, both by supporting them financially, by doing well, but also just to, really to take care of her and keep her mother alive. Her mother lived and breathed for Brooke. And it's funny because I wouldn't say that Terry was seeking the limelight, although she was definitely not afraid of making controversial statements and of,
Right.
being contrarian, I would say. And she did, I
He was
love
out
seeing her.
there on those talk shows sitting
Yeah,
right next to
yes,
Brooke too,
absolutely. And I
not
love
standing
when,
by.
someone in the audience will say, I think Pretty Baby's horrible. And Terry will say, did you see the film? And it's no. But the thing that I think though is that I think Terry had pretty low feelings of self-worth herself. And having this, beautiful, extraordinary daughter was this vehicle through which she could live her dreams. But it's interesting because when I showed Brooke the final film, when it was done, one of her takeaways was, it made me kind of sad about my mom that she didn't have the self-esteem to see like Terry can go do all of this stuff, that it was so much about Brooke. Is kind of heartbreaking when you see it all. But I also think Terry is remarkable in a lot of ways. And, every mother-daughter relationship is very complicated. And so many people have come up to me after watching this movie and said, oh my God, like I relate to this, whether it's with their mother or with another parent or person in their family, this push pull, love, infuriating pain, especially of course, if someone is dealing with a parent who is alcoholic or has an addiction issue of any kind. There's so much there. And the thing that made me really excited about exploring their relationship in this film was that because of the talk shows you mentioned that they did together, there was so much rich material to use as verite-like scenes, but in archive, where you can kind of see the dynamic between Brooke and Terry play out in front of your eyes and change over years.
Yeah, and one of those was a talk show where the host went really, you really felt for Terry here. He went very negative on her in front of her daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a cringeworthy moment to watch, actually, that particular one that you found.
Yeah, I think you're talking about a clip when the host, I think Brooke is 12 and Terry, her mom, is sitting next to her, and the host says, you have the face of an alcoholic. And he kind of
Right.
describes her skin and says, I'm paraphrasing, but you don't look good. You have the face of an alcoholic. You look terrible.
Yeah.
And Brooke, who's 12, who she's not going to lie. And actually, in all the interviews I've seen with Brooke over decades, she always is telling the truth. And that's amazing in itself for any interview subject. But
Yeah.
she says at age 12, my mom has a skin condition. So yeah, there is some issues with her skin. She's not going to lie and say, my mom's not an alcoholic, but she also is protecting her mom in that moment as a 12-year-old. And I think that says so much about Brooke's character, about who she is and her love and protectiveness of her mom. It also speaks to what the larger dynamic of being the child of an alcoholic is.
She's remarkably poised
Mhm.
throughout her career, and I think highly underrated as an actress.
Mm,
It
mhm,
really comes through here as well in the clips you show, in these range of movies that she made, that she never quite got the credit
mhm.
for her acting, and I believe she thinks that too, probably.
She's still doing a lot of interesting work. And she's the kind of person, like, she wants to be really challenged and pushed as an actor and as a performer. The film traces her evolution as a performer in some ways. She went to Princeton, and that was a huge moment in her life in terms of really getting into musical theater and comedy, for example, and learning to kind of follow her creative instincts from the inside out. I think previously, although she was a really good actor, she was often worked with on set as this beautiful object. And going to Princeton, having that inside out experience, then getting to do Broadway, getting to do comedy, I think that was incredibly enlivening for her. And now she's continuing to do all kinds of roles and is always looking for the next challenge, something she's never done before, where she can learn and grow and push herself as an actor.
I want to show another clip. It's from the very end of the show, and it's really catches, talk about, you mentioned the verite, it really catches her family life now, talking about her world now with her two daughters sitting around a dinner table, and it's fascinating to watch. So let's take a look at some of that scene.
But
I'm interested in that concept. What is weird about that?
During that time, it came out, and that was considered something that was like very well done, very well written. Like, you were great in
Only
it.
in Europe.
Only in Europe. Oh.
Why wouldn't you be able to see that movie today? Why wouldn't that movie be able to be made today?
Like, it's just everything's changed.
It's called child pornography, technically.
Also, just like everything is different now.
You do have shows like Euphoria where, you know, you have girls that are young playing characters that do go through sexual things. But I just think
not
it's
11.
I just love that scene as it goes on.
Yeah.
And it begs the question here. She had real trust in you as a director to just let the cameras roll, capture what you could capture. She's interviewed honestly throughout the movie here, and gave you an archive that's unbelievable. But I mean, that's real trust between director and subject here that is so necessary in a documentary like this, I think.
She really did trust me. And she also, you know, she loves films and art, and she really respects the artistic process. And I think that's the biggest part of it. You know, I think Brooke knew that this would turn out really great if she was not involved in it at all. You know what I mean? You can't have perspective on yourself the same way an outsider can have perspective on you. But it was a real leap of faith for Brooke to do this, and I'm really grateful. And yeah, you know, letting someone film inside your home with your kids, yeah, that's all very delicate stuff. The way that scene you just played a clip from happened was really that I always knew I wanted a little sprinkling of contemporary day in the life stuff with Brooke throughout the film. And I wanted to not see her daughters until the very end of the film, because I thought that the cumulative effect of going through this complex relationship between Brooke and her mom, and then going through the experience Brooke had with her first pregnancy of postpartum depression after the birth of her first daughter, all of that, and then coming out the other end and seeing this incredible family she has. I thought that alone would be very powerful. So I went in thinking this might just be a visual moment of the family having dinner. But when they sat down to dinner, I asked a single question. I just said, have you guys seen any of your mom's early films? And it kind of like sparked this whole conversation that it's almost like they'd been thinking about this, but had never talked about it with each other. They'd never had a conversation about their mom's early films before. And it was one of those like rare and privileged moments as a documentary director, where you feel like because you're there filming, the fact that you're putting a frame around something gives the conversation a little extra meaning it might not otherwise have. And sometimes what you see, and I think this is what happened here, is that the people you're filming with really are like, I'm going to use this opportunity and really go into these hard, uncomfortable, but important, rich conversations that we don't often just have 90 minutes to sit down and have, even within our own families. So that's what it was like. And I think that also just getting to see this remarkable family dynamic that Brooke has created, where people can be open and disagree with each other, but respectfully, but they can debate, but in a loving way. Like, I thought that was such a testament to who Brooke is and the journey she's been on in itself.
There's no question about that, too. And I have to ask about this archive, because the material's amazing. There doesn't seem to be any time in Brooke's life where there wasn't a camera in her face, you know, especially in the early years. And it's revealed that Terry actually ran this archive. She created
Mm.
this archive. Brooke says she had a camera, she had her hand out for a videotape after every single television appearance. She
Yes.
asked for a copy of it before they left the studio. And
Yeah.
she had it all there as a filmmaker. It's a gold.
Yes, it was absolute gold. And you're like, oh, thank goodness Terry went up to every television, post afterwards and demanded a copy. It was that, but then it was also that Terry had commissioned a documentary that was never finished, that some of the most interesting visual material in this project comes from. Is a documentary called Look at Brooke. So, there's this stuff, it almost feels like a home movie, but it's not a home movie. It's like Terry teaching Brooke how to swim and them driving on a highway in a convertible together, all these strange situations that Terry constructed for Look at Brooke. And so we had that material also. Plus, we went way beyond what was in that initial archive to get a lot of contextual stuff from the time, and like bigger picture stuff to put this in a bigger cultural context. But it was an amazing treasure trove to start with.
How did you like the structure of it? It's presented as 2 parts, but it
Yeah.
premiered at Sundance. Like I said, it plays to me. I watched it all at once, and I think most people will want to do it. It's riveting. You don't want to
Mhm.
stop at part 1. You want to see it all. But it does play like a movie,
Mhm.
but it's in this format. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I was approached about doing it as a feature, and I actually asked if I could do it in 2 parts. And the reason why was because I just saw this really natural halfway point in Brooke's experience at Princeton and what an impact that had on her. And I could see that the first half could be about Brooke, going from thinking of herself as a beautiful object to discovering her mind. And then the second half could be, okay, what happens if she decides to use that mind? What will the reaction of the culture be? And it's bookended by 2 books that Brooke writes. And so I just could kind of see it in my head immediately. And I thought that having a bigger canvas to work on would give me the chance to tell the bigger cultural story alongside Brooke's personal story. So that's why I wanted to do it that way. But I did very much hope that it would play as a singular experience. So I'm glad that it felt that way to you.
It does. And finally, I want to ask you, as we like to wrap up these half-hour with, if people haven't seen the show yet, and we hope this is a tease for them to see it. I can't imagine they won't want to after listening to you talk about it here. But what do you hope they get out of it? What do you hope they will take away from this that will make them want to see this and put this in their lives?
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say it's a story there are some very dark stretches to it, but it has an incredibly unexpected and uplifting ending. And I think the bigger thing too, though, is that this is not like, oh, let's look back at 30 years. Things were awful then and very different. It's actually incredibly contemporary. I think that you watch Brooke's journey and her experience, and it's not a time capsule so much as it is a dynamic that still very much exists. And so I hope it leaves people asking questions about how we look at each other and how we look especially at women and girls and their appearance and their sexuality and how we judge that, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. And I hope that it's incredibly provocative and that leaves you having, heated debates and conversations with whoever you watch it with afterward.
I think it's all of those things. And good luck at the Emmys. And thank you for joining us here. And thank you to Hulu as well. You can see this on Hulu anytime, and it's well worth it. Let's thank Lana Wilson for joining us on Half Hour With today.
Thank you so much for having me.